This man was just executed at Florida State Prison after spending nearly 30 years in solitary confinement on death row. His name was Glen Edward Rogers, known to the public as the Casanova Killer, a man who charmed his victims before killing them without hesitation. On May 15, 2025, at exactly 6:16 p.m., a lethal injection was administered. Minutes later, Rogers was declared dead. He was 62 years old. For years, he claimed to have killed over 70 people. Only a few cases were ever confirmed, but his crimes stretched across the country from Ohio to California, Mississippi to Florida. He didn't kill out of rage. He planned every move. He targeted women, gained their trust, then took their lives. But what shocked people most wasn't how he killed. It was what he said and what he asked for in his final moments. Right before his execution, Rogers gave a brief, chilling final statement. He also requested a last meal that left prison officials and the public questioning his true intentions. In this video, we'll uncover his story, his crimes, his final words, and the unexpected request he made for his last meal. Glen Edward Rogers was born on July 15, 1962 in Hamilton, Ohio. He was one of 7 children in a deeply unstable family. His father was an alcoholic prone to sudden violence, and his mother struggled to keep control. From a young age, Glen learned that survival meant adapting, lying, manipulating, and becoming invisible when necessary. Neighbors later described Glen as strangely charming, even when he was a child, polite, well-spoken, but something about his eyes made people uneasy. At just 16, he dropped out of school and married a woman named Deborah. They had 2 children together, but the marriage quickly crumbled under the weight of his abuse and drinking. By his early 20s, Glen had already developed a disturbing pattern, moving from town to town, picking up odd jobs, getting into fights, and leaving behind women who feared him. What's terrifying is that Rogers didn't always kill. Sometimes he'd spend weeks wooing women, playing the role of a Southern gentleman, only to suddenly disappear with their money jewelry, or worse, leave their bodies behind. He started calling himself a contractor, but there was no company, no license, just a beat-up truck and a toolbox filled with lies. Wherever he went, someone ended up missing. By the early 1990s, Rogers was officially on the radar. Multiple states had open cases with eerily similar MOs. A drifter, handsome mid-30s, meeting women in bars, living with them briefly, then vanishing, right before their bodies were discovered. In 1993, a woman named Sandra Gallagher was found burned to death in her own car in Los Angeles. Just days earlier, witnesses had seen her leaving a bar with Rogers. Soon after, in Mississippi, Linda Price, a woman Rogers had been living with, was found stabbed to death in her home. And then in Tampa, Florida, Tina Marie Cribbs was discovered dead in a motel bathtub. Rogers had checked in with her. Surveillance showed them entering, but only he left. He was no longer a charming drifter. He was now a fugitive and one of the FBI's most wanted. But even while being hunted nationwide, Rogers couldn't stop himself. He kept calling his family, bragging, writing letters. One of his brothers turned over a letter to police where Rogers casually mentioned getting rid of a few more. Another note simply read, "They fall for it every time. Smile, talk sweet, then lights out." He was captured in Kentucky in November 1995 after leading police on a high-speed chase. Inside his car, blood-stained clothes, fake IDs, and a map with 3 cities circled in red, all places where women had recently gone missing. When questioned, Rogers refused to confess outright, but then came a chilling moment. He leaned forward, smiled, and said, "You're not even asking about the others." In 1997, Rogers was convicted of 2 murders, Tina Marie Cribbs and Sandra Gallagher, and sentenced to death in Florida. But even behind bars, he couldn't resist the spotlight. He gave interviews, wrote to journalists. In one letter, he claimed he was responsible for Nicole Brown Simpson's murder, an accusation that was never taken seriously but got him back in the headlines. Over the next 2 decades, he faded from public view, but the families of his victims never forgot, and the question lingered: how many more were there? How many stories would never be told? After nearly 30 years on death row at Florida State Prison, Glen Edward Rogers finally received what he had once bragged: he wasn't afraid of death. His execution was scheduled for May 15, 2025. There was no final appeal, no last-minute plea from his attorneys. Rogers said nothing. According to prison staff, he nodded quietly as if accepting a fate he had prepared for long ago. 2 days before the scheduled execution, Rogers was moved to what's known as Death Watch, a separate high-security unit reserved for inmates within 72 hours of execution. In a small windowless cell, he was monitored 24/7. Every word, every movement, every breath. On the night of May 14th, he didn't sleep. 6:00 a.m. execution day. A guard entered and gave the formal notice. "Mr. Rogers, today is your execution date." No reaction, no questions. Rogers simply stood up, adjusted his shirt, and replied, "I guess it's time." Around midday, he was asked about his last meal, a tradition granted to every death row inmate in Florida within a modest budget limit. He didn't hesitate. Glen Edward Rogers requested 2 pieces of spicy southern fried chicken, garlic bread, toasted and buttered, 1 cold Coca-Cola, and a slice of homemade apple pie. No steak, no extravagant feast, no alcohol. Just a simple, deliberate choice, as if he were having lunch at a roadside diner, not preparing for death by lethal injection. A prison official who had witnessed over 20 executions later said, "Some people eat like it's their last moment on earth. Glen Rogers ate like he had plans tomorrow." 5:45 p.m. Rogers was escorted to the execution chamber. Every footstep echoed through cold concrete halls lined with steel doors and silence. Behind bulletproof glass, 12 witnesses waited. 3 were relatives of the victims. 2 were local reporters. 1 chaplain. The rest were prison staff and legal observers. Rogers lay on the gurney. 4 leather straps secured his arms and legs. A medical technician searched for a viable vein, a process that took nearly 7 minutes due to the many scars on Rogers's arms from past self-inflicted wounds. Then came the question, "Do you have any final words?" He paused for a moment, then turned his head toward the glass-locking eyes with the victims' families and said, "I hope you find the rest of them. Some are under the mud." No apology, no remorse, no explanation. Just one last cryptic sentence and a room full of unanswered questions. A woman, the sister of Sandra Gallagher, broke down in tears in the witness gallery. No one knew exactly who the rest referred to. Which victims, which cases, or perhaps all of them. 10 p.m. the final dose was administered. Rogers closed his eyes. He didn't resist. He said nothing more. At 6:19 p.m., a physician pronounced him dead. His name was officially removed from Florida's death row records. No one claimed the body. According to prison sources, the body was cremated. His ashes remain in temporary storage at a funeral home in Lake Butler. No relatives, no will, no final message. Glen Edward Rogers died the same way he lived: cold, calculated, and unsettlingly silent. But what's even more terrifying is the possibility that we may never know how many victims he truly left behind. Glen Edward Rogers is no longer alive, but the shadows he left behind still stretch across the country. Dozens of families still wonder if the man who smiled his way into their lives might have been the same man who disappeared with someone they loved. He claimed to have killed over 70 people. Only a few were confirmed. The rest, well, some stories end with a name on a tombstone. Others end in silence. And sometimes the silence is far louder than a confession. If you found this case disturbing, you're not alone. Let us know what you think about Roger's final words and whether you believe the truth died with him. Subscribe for more true crime stories and stay safe out there.